Welcome to the WellCast. Life is messy. We're here to help you sort it out.
Welcome to another episode of the WellCast. I am Jordan Hogue, joined by the fabulously dashing, collared-shirted of a man.
It's very kind of you.
Mr. Mike Sarasoni.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
It's good to be here.
Of course. And you look very hydrated today.
I have. It's very hot out. It's
Yeah.
the middle of summer, and it's very hot out. And you have to drink water when you live in Fresno. You have to drink water when you live anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty universal thing.
Yeah, yeah.
A need that we all have.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're touching on some real needs today.
we are. Yeah, and we're gonna get into some light and fluffy conversation. That's what we like to do here at the
Yeah,
WellCast.
as of recently, we're going to talk today about pain and suffering.
Yeah, I think if we're going to do a podcast that hits people where they are and all it is light and fluffy, we're failing as a podcast. So I think we want to talk about this idea of pain and suffering, man. And I think it's so relevant to so many people because everyone in this world goes through pain and suffering.
Yeah, if there's anything that every person in the world all experience at some point, it's pain and suffering. And I think one of the reasons we want to talk about it, right, is just because, as pastors, we enter into these times with people often, and even though it's universal, it's almost always universally surprising for people, right?
Well, I guess if you're listening to this, either you are in pain of some kind or you will be soon. That's just the world that we live in. And so I just really, I've been looking forward to this episode, not because it's a fun topic, but because it's a real topic. And it's something that I know our listeners are dealing with or will deal with very soon. And so,
yeah, it's kind of one of those things that if it's not fun to think about, talk about, but if you are prepared, if you have sort of a framework beforehand, it doesn't make what you experience any easier necessarily, but it gives you the tools and how to navigate this difficult thing, right?
Yeah, and a lot because of the surprise, a lot of people aren't prepared when pain and suffering does happen. And so our hope is, as we talk through, we're going to share a lot about our own pain and suffering and how we've navigated it. Not that we're the experts on navigating pain and suffering, but maybe something we have experienced might be a blessing in your life as you walk through your own trials of many kinds in this world.
So one of the things you and I talked about at Chipotle earlier was
our burritos.
Other than the deliciousness or how my burrito exploded, that was a tragedy.
Yeah.
But you said that tragedy has been a big theme in your life.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I often tell people that my three oldest kids who are around for much of the tragedy, they've experienced more pain and suffering and death than most kids their age ever should be exposed to. And what I mean by that is at an early age in my kid's life, my brother-in-law went missing. Him and my sister had this big fight. He went missing. And he was gone for 24 hours where we didn't know where he was. And what ended up happening was we started calling the police and bringing them into it. They did a whole search for him. And actually our church, it was a Sunday, and they skipped church. They closed the doors and they went out to his last known location and they started searching for him. And they found him. He had taken his own life. And I just remember the feeling of having to be the one who told my sister that they found her husband, 27 years old. She's going to be a widow now. And the scream that she let out, the emotion, me picking her up off the floor, and the whole year that passed, that was really heavy for my kids. It was really heavy for Kristen and I. It was a really hard time in our life, but really both of my sisters have been a part of tragedy in my life. So
that was right before you came on the well, right?
Yeah, a year to the day. So my work anniversary is a year anniversary of his death.
Wow. And
so we processed that with my sister, but it took its toll on me as well. He was my intern at the last church that I was at. So we were close, and I just never saw it coming. And then fast forward 4 years, and this last July, my sister, we were all getting together at a family reunion, and we all come into town, and my sister was she let us know. It was like the height of COVID. And so she let us know. She said, I think I have some allergies. I just wanted to let you know. And my little sister, a glimpse of redemption is she was pregnant. She had remarried and she's having her another child, her second child. And she says, I'm pregnant. I can't get COVID because I have doctor's appointments coming up. Like, can you just get tested? And my sister agreed to get tested, and she went and she got tested for COVID. To this point, we just thought, COVID was something that really affected the elderly.
Immunocompromised.
Yeah,
people
immunocompromised.
Like that,
And so we didn't think much of it. I remember sending a text to her that day, and I was like, hey, I'm really sorry you're going to miss the family reunion, but let's schedule a time.
She tested positive.
Oh, yeah, she tested positive. And I said, let's schedule a time, coming up where you can come out to Fresno and visit with your nieces. And so I really thought there was going to be a next conversation. Well, that's the last conversation I ever had with her. 2 days later, after she got home, she actually was rushed to the hospital because she couldn't breathe. It was the Delta variant, which we found out was much harsher than the previous forms. And
for example, like I got it, and it just kind of took me out for a few days.
Yeah, so did we, right? So before my sister had it, we had it. Our whole family went through it. My kids had sniffles, and I had a sore throat. It was bad, but it wasn't like this. And so my sister, she goes to the hospital. And I was hoping, we know people who have gone to the hospital, got some breathing treatments, and then came home.
Yeah. And
so I was kind of hoping that that's what it was going to be like. Well, a couple days later, she gets put on a ventilator. Her oxygen stats were plummeting. And I just remember coming to church in that time and really just kind of going, what is going on?
Yeah.
Like, what's happening? Like my sister's 52 years old. Like she had 2 kids. She had just gotten married. I did her wedding just 2 years before this. This was not supposed to happen in my brain. Like I couldn't fathom it. And I would come to church and we would sing songs like that proclaimed the goodness of God, right? And I believe that at the core. I still do. But I was struggling. I'm like, what does this look like? And so for me, it was a really hard and dark time, both times, of figuring out how do we, as Christians, how do we walk through pain and suffering in a healthy way? Like, what does it look like as followers of Jesus to process and to find hope in the midst of suffering? It was really hard.
Your sister ended up passing away?
Yeah, so she was in the hospital for about a month. And it was brutal. I mean, it was really hard to hear. They wouldn't let anybody in until right before she passed away. There was an iPad that my brother-in-law would bring in there because they finally let him in, and they would bring the iPad in, and they would just audio and let me talk to her, but she couldn't talk to us, and it was just a really slow period of letting her go.
Yeah.
And I know people who are listening, they can relate to that. They have people in their life that they've had that slow releasing of somebody, and it really was
so
was
brutal.
hard. It was brutal. It was hard.
What is for you in both of those times, what's the balance of being, grieving yourself and then also trying to just be a leader in your own family?
Yeah.
And what was that like for you?
Both times were very similar because I'm wired a certain way, right? I think we have to know who we are. If we're oblivious to how God's wired us, then it's really hard to live out health, and we have to know the shadow sides of who we are. And I'm a leader by nature. It's what I do, and I fill leadership voids. And so as soon as tragedy strikes, I need to be the one who's solving issues, solving problems, caring for people. It's the pastor in me, and it helps me with what I do for work. But really, it stunts my ability to grieve, to go through the grieving process. And so when my brother-in-law took his own life, I jumped right in. I'm like, my sister's moving in with us. We're going to care for her. We're going to love her. We're going to walk. We're going to have to work through this with our kids who experience police all around our house. And now their uncle's gone. And the same thing with my older sister when she passed away. It was just, I had to do the funeral, and I very much compartmentalized things. And I remember 2 instances, man. God is so good because he puts the right people in your path at the right time.
Yeah.
God uses so many he shows up in ways you wouldn't even expect. But 2 of the pastors on staff played a huge role, and they probably don't even know this, but Brian King, who is our associate pastor here at our North Campus, he just asked me, he's like, "Hey, have you cried?" And I looked at him, I said, "No." And he's like, "You need to." And in that moment,
Did you just start weeping in front of him?
No, I went home, but I really did. I went home, I took a half day off of work, and I went home and I spent 5 hours in my room alone. Jeez. I didn't cry for all 5 hours, but it was like this flood of emotion. I would read text messages from my sister that she had sent me. And it was just the permission that I needed to actually enter into the grieving process. And then I remember 2 days before my sister passed away, I was in church and I was campus pastoring here at North, and I was the song "Goodness of God" came on. And at that point, I had wrestled with, like, okay, she's probably going to die. Like, absent of the most amazing miracle outside of the resurrection, like, she's probably going to die. Yeah. And I had come to terms with that. And I'm sitting here singing the goodness of God, and recounting, like, all the ways through this grief that he's been good to me. And I'm weeping in the front row of our church. Like, it's like ugly crying. Yeah. And like, I can't control it, and I don't know where it's coming from or when it's going to end. And I remember it was the end set, and I have to go on stage. And Brad came up to me and he put his arm around me and he said, "I got this." And he went on stage and he closed out the gathering and he gave me the space to continue to grieve. And it was really, both of those guys, there were so many more, people, but those are 2 stories that really stand out of how God showed up in incredible ways to help me walk through this grief.
In both those situations, they're so tough. How do you process with God? What were some sort of key components of your relationship with God that were helpful?
I think 2 things that come to, well, maybe 3. I think community was big, and I know we're going to talk about that a little later in the episode, but that was big for me, having people in my life that entered in and cared. Text messages, phone calls, emails, whatever. But I think the other 2 is God's word. It was so good to me during that time, like reading through his promises, reading through who he is, his character, was really, really good for me. Like the fact that, in Matthew 5, he said, "Blessed are those who mourn." Like that permission is in scripture, like mourn, like go ahead. Like it's a good thing. And then, the last thing is remembering God's faithfulness. Like he's been faithful and good over my whole life. And even when I thought things were bad, he's used them for good. And so if I can remember and have a strong memory of his faithfulness in my life, then I can go through anything, because I know that that it's true that God works for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purposes. Like I know that that's true. I've seen it in my life. And so this time has to be true as well, even though I don't understand it. And even though I don't really know why this had to happen. But honestly, it's so easy to talk about, the theme of my life being pain and suffering. There are a lot of other themes as well, but I don't have the corner on grief. I don't have the corner on pain and suffering. I know you and Jamie have a story of your own. Why don't you share that with us?
Yeah, I would say I don't know that I've gone through anything that's like, I don't know. I don't know that I would say that like I've had like themes of tragedy like you. But I think probably the closest I got was it was not this last December, but the December before. It was Christmas Eve, and no, it was the day before Christmas Eve. And
so it's supposed to be a festive, fun time.
Yeah, And, you know, we were pregnant. We were at that point 11 weeks pregnant.
Well, we weren't pregnant.
Jamie was
Yeah.
pregnant. And I mean, our fertility journey was really difficult. So like, you know, this one was kind of we were like, oh my gosh, we got pregnant within like a year. That's amazing. Rowan had been a lot harder of a pregnancy to come up to. And, you know, we had bought all the onesies. We were going to tell everyone on Christmas Day. We had gifts packed to give to family members that they would open and be like, oh, my grandpa, you know, like all those things were planned out. And we go the day before Christmas Eve for the first real ultrasound at 11 weeks. And I don't know why. I think I am kind of like an observant person. Like I have some sort of ability to like
Spidey sense.
feel how other people are feeling. If somebody's frustrated with me, I can usually ask them like, hey, is everything okay or whatever.
Sure.
And something was off with the lady right away when she got that thing on there. And I was just like she's not reacting correctly.
Right.
And she was fidgeting a lot, trying to find the heartbeat. And we got to this place where I remember my wife was like, is there no heartbeat? You know, because we had heard the heartbeat. They did like kind of an auditory one early on at like 6 weeks or something. And she's like, I'm just having trouble, you know, don't worry. Yeah. And then my wife just immediately started crying, and like she knew what was going on. And she found the baby, and it had stopped growing at 8 weeks, which usually just means it's not viable anymore. It had died at some point. And so we found out right then, you know, she gave us we don't know for sure. There could be something else going on. So we need you to go get on Christmas Eve. We need you to go get, you know, the scan, the bigger one. And so that was our holiday, man. Realizing that we had lost the baby. Not only that she wouldn't naturally pass the baby, but she had to go in and do surgery. And she had to do that by herself because it was, like you said, the height of COVID. And all like we were post Thanksgiving when that huge wave hit, and the hospital wasn't letting us in. So I just had to drop my wife off for this like hugely emotional, horrible situation.
How'd you feel in that moment?
I just felt helpless.
Yeah.
I remember like, I'm sure when you first found out about your brother, I don't know if you remember that feeling where it's like you're almost like it's shock or whatever it is. You know, you're kind of like you're almost numb immediately. It's almost like static in your brain.
Yeah.
And like I can't believe this is my story. You know,
I do. I remember that.
And then that whole the holidays were so brutal.
Yeah, I bet.
And you haven't processed, so you don't know how to tell everyone on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
And you're just like, and then, dude, the worst was putting away all the presents and like taking the ultrasounds out of the frames.
That sounds so hard.
And it was just like, and, you know, being there for her and then me like losing the hope of like having this child. And, you know, it was very early on, but it felt very real. And that's probably like the most thick tragedy we've experienced together.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that does stand out to me, and I don't want to move right to hope, but one of the students in my ministry for a long time here, his mom was a nurse at the hospital. And I just felt like it was God. And I didn't even know that she worked in that wing where she was getting her procedure. It was just God taking care of my family that on New Year's Eve, because insurance and all that crap, we were like, well, let's do it this year, you know. New Year's Eve, my wife goes to get this procedure done that reignites the grief, all these things. But God provides a person who's safe in that moment to care for her. And I remember feeling she texted me, you know, she's here. And I don't know if she wants her name to be, so I'm not going to say it, but I was just like, that was like one of the hardest cries I had. Yeah. Because it was like, oh, thank you. Yeah. I couldn't be there to take care of her.
And even in I'm sure even in this hard spot that you were, you saw a glimpse of God's goodness.
Yeah, and it just immediately brought me to this quote by Tim Keller, where he just says, like, you don't always get an explanation for why things happen to you, but you can know that it's not because God doesn't care.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously he proved that on the cross. He died and suffered with us,
Yeah.
and for us. But it just, I remember in that moment, just like, thank you for caring.
Yeah.
Thank you for being present, even in this difficulty.
That's so important, man. And I have some questions for you as you, but one of the things that I hear you saying is it's so important for us to look for the ways God's showing up in the middle of heartache and trauma and trials and grief, because God is in so many different ways showing up to care for people that he loves. And the worst thing that we can do is to turn off our antenna that receives that notices it, the awareness that we have. And so, man, I think that's just a good principle that you have brought out through your experience. What did it look like for you and Jamie to process together? So you're talking about, I mean, my trauma happened to other people, right? But you and Jamie are one. This is your family. What does it look like for you guys to process together? Was it? I'm assuming it wasn't a quick thing, but what does it look like for a husband to care for his wife, and what does it look like for you guys to process grief together?
I think there's a sense of strength that I think is needed in those moments that is not fake. There's kind of a fine line, the people are like, you just need to be strong. You need to be the rock for your people, And I felt like I did need to be that, but I don't think that that's divorced from emotion. I think if I had not cried with her, I think she would have thought that somehow I was above this and she should have had a different perspective or something. I think as a husband and a partner, I think I didn't have the answers. And so I felt like the best thing I could do is just not be like pastor to my wife, not try and, I don't know, teach her things or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's just simply keep pointing her to God. As I point myself to God, making sure that we're in prayer and bringing these things. And then in moments where she was angry or didn't have the words, she would pray with and over. I mean, I would pray, in those moments. And in moments where I didn't have the words or was angry or frustrated, she would pray and would pray over me. And I think when you, like, out of all the ingredients in pain and suffering, when you add that aspect of, like, we're just pointing to the one who loves us the most and asking for help in times of trouble to walk with us through this valley of the shadow of death, that kind of creates a bonding.
Yeah.
That experience, it really brought us together.
Yeah.
It really, really did. And I think, sometimes those things drive people apart. But I feel like by the grace of God, it brought us together. And there were stages, something that nobody had talked to me about before with miscarriage was like, it kind of crushes your hope in pregnancy. Yeah. The dreaming for a long time. Yeah. Where you lose babies or you have these experiences, and then you naturally want to guard your heart. And so I had to guard my heart, but I felt like it was my role to also just be excited and allow her permission to be like, when we finally did get pregnant again, to be like, this is amazing. This is still a gift. Yeah. And you don't have to like pretend like everything's going to go bad or, just convince yourself of the worst so you're surprised by the best. Let's celebrate this. And even when I felt like, dude, I'm serious. I had a hard time believing that Jubilee was real until like 7 or 8 months into pregnancy, because I was so guarded. Yeah. But I felt like one of my roles was to help her experience the joy. Because, you only go through that a few times in your life as a woman, right? Yeah. And I wanted her to experience her pregnancy and spend that time and to trust that God still has something to do through that, you know?
And that's such a good word because, I had that same experience. Like, I think we have these similar like stories where tragedy, when you experience enough or a certain kind of tragedy, you start to believe everything is going to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, I don't deserve this, or, this is just going to end poorly. And I think we can experience tragedy without losing hope. And, I know you mentioned hope earlier, but I think it's a big part of what it looks like. And so how we process through pain and suffering has to include hope. It can include, how it can include questioning, like, why did this happen? Some people say, instead of asking why, ask what. Like, I think why is an honest question.
Yeah.
Like, but all too often, tragedy or trauma or things that happen in this broken world are the things that pull people away from God instead of driving them into his arms.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think there's so much wisdom when things happen that are outside of our control or things that are painful, that we just make a conscious effort to turn into the loving arms of God instead of pushing him away. Because all the answers that I've experienced walking through grief and suffering, I'm guessing you would say the same, are because of what God has done and how he's cared for us.
Yeah, I think, one thing that rang through my head constantly was like, if God's big enough to where I could get mad at him because he didn't prevent something from happening, like he's powerful enough, if that presupposition is there, then there should also be the possibility that he can use this terrible thing for good.
Yeah.
That he can use this terrible thing to create life.
It's one of his promises, right?
And, yeah. And I like, if the presupposition is there to get mad and ask why, there also, that same presupposition should be used to say you're powerful enough to do something incredible out of this. Mm-hmm. And it just, I don't know why, but that the Holy Spirit just kept kind of singing that, I guess, to me, and like feeling like it was almost like a thing that kept returning to me, that I don't see the grand mosaic and everything, and I may never have the answer. But like I said earlier, it's just not because he doesn't care, you know. And so, I think I don't want to move through this too fast, but I just think it is important that we ask very honest questions of God, right? Because it's a part of the grief process.
Yeah. Well, and it's part of the prayer process, right? I mean, we say it all the time, but prayer is a place to be honest, not to be perfect.
Yeah, and your role as a Christian is not to pretend like you just have unending assurance.
Well, I don't want to make light of it, right? I mean, but God knows everything anyway.
Yeah.
Like, he knows how you're feeling. So it's an invitation just to be authentic and be real with him. So that he knows you trust him enough to be real. Yeah. Right? That's a big part of trust. Like, do you trust God enough to bring him the real you? And I think in grief and dealing with tragedy and trauma, this is a time where it's okay for you to be raw and
That's
real
so good.
with God.
I think there's something that there's this kind of strand in the church or a narrative at times that like the more faith you have, the less you'll be upset when something bad happens. Yeah. And I just don't, I feel like that's not even biblical.
Well, I think that train of thinking, it actually diminishes our humanity. Yeah. Which actually diminishes the gap between us and God, right? Mm-hmm. Like we're human. We experience human emotions. And if that were true, well, how do you deal with, Jesus weeping at the story of Lazarus? Like, how do you deal with Jesus weeping as he's riding into Jerusalem? Like Jesus in his humanity, and I would say God has emotions as well, but Jesus in his humanity puts his emotions on display. Yeah. So how much more does that give us permission to also have those
I mean, a quarter of our psalms are lament psalms. Yeah. Which are people crying out to God in their grief.
Yeah. And Jesus turned over the tables in the tabernacle, in the temple. Yeah. So I mean, we see emotions all through Scripture in our Savior.
Well, and if Jesus had any opportunity to just really get mad at somebody for questioning why, he would have, in that same Lazarus story, been like, hey, Martha and Mary, don't question me
Yeah,
when they go
right.
to him, like, why weren't you here? You could have saved him, you know? And, but he sits and he's like, just, well, bring me to my friend's tomb.
Yeah.
And then he, like you said, he weeps.
Mm-hmm.
And it's with them. It's for his friend. It's just like, that is the God who's among us and cares, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's the God who's walking with us. I often tell people, like, God carries us through the mud,
Yeah.
like, of our life when things are hard, and so why would we want to do that without him?
Yeah.
Why would we want to push him away? And so, like, I just think if you're walking through grief in this moment, like, the biggest thing I can offer to you is to tell you, turn towards God.
Yeah, some people think it's like, oh, well, God's your crutch. I'm like, yeah, my legs are broken.
Right, yeah.
I'm disabled in my
I can't do this on my own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just think, like, that's such a strange dig at, like, the presupposition, the foundation of the gospel is that I'm deeply broken in need of a savior. Please be my wheelchair, my crutch. I'm laid out without you, you know?
Yeah, totally. I agree.
Yeah, I think, like, in preparation process, you have to ask an understanding, like, look, if suffering and pain is going to touch you in some way in your life at some point, who are you surrounding yourself with, right? Like, what kind of a part did community play in your process?
Yeah. I think both times community's been huge.
You answered that a little bit, right?
Yeah.
With texting and things like that. And
Yeah, but I mean, we were a part of a great life group in Simi Valley when my brother-in-law took his own life. And we're a part of a great life group now here in Fresno. And those people, it's kind of like, you know, when Aaron's holding up the arms of Moses. Like, like, those people were Aaron to me. Like, they showed up, and I'm still using gift cards from the first time. Like,
wow.
people gave us gift cards for meals, and like, they just showered us with generosity and love. They spent the night with my sister when, like, I just couldn't do it anymore. And like, they were in there, you know, they literally shared a bed with her as she's weeping. They're females, but they were in there. They were in her life. They gave us breaks. They watched our kids. They said, you and Kristen need a date night. Like, that was a heavy part of our life. And they showed up. Our life group in Simi showed up. And the same is true of our life group here, brought meals. I remember we got the greatest cinnamon rolls from the DeMambis. Like, the DeMambis sent us cinnamon rolls. I'm using their names. Don't expect them to send you cinnamon rolls.
Shout out DeMambis.
but they sent us cinnamon rolls. They're not even in our life group. They just love us.
Yeah.
And our life group showed up in incredible ways. Meals and texts and prayers. And I mean, community is one of the things God uses the most to care for us in times of grief. Did you have the same experience?
I remember we had, when we went for, like, the scan on Christmas Eve, my best friend, he just left all of the things he had to go do that day with his family. He's like, I'll watch Rowan. I'll stay at your house while you need to do that. And because the day before, you know, we had actually dropped Rowan off at his house just to play with their kid and to just like, hey, we gotta go do the ultrasound for the baby. And then I remember just like, I call him like, look, we have to go do a blood test. Like, things aren't good. And he was like, do whatever you need to do. Take all day. I don't, like, Rowan can stay the night here. I don't care. You know, like that kind of stuff. And then just my buddies, her friends, surrounding us, like you said, it was kind of a weird, there was like an aspect of God taking care of us in that, like, the holidays, so many people are already around you. You're already surrounded by your family.
Sure.
You already have people. So even though we didn't immediately shout it from the rooftops of just being like, here's what happened, we just were in a loving environment of all these people.
Yeah, it's so good.
And then when we did eventually tell people, I mean, so many people came through with just bringing us meals, all that stuff. And it felt like, I don't know, you know, this last Tuesday, I mean, I officiated a funeral, and it was, Mike, when I tell you it was hard, it's a really hard situation. Very tragic. And I was meeting with the mother of the deceased, and she was just like, look, day of, all of my best girlfriends are going to be there setting up, taking care of things, so I don't have to worry about it. And then I said, well, it's amazing. It takes a tribe in this season. And she said, I don't know where I would be.
Mm.
And I mean, that's so true for us, for anybody. I mean, if you're going through something and you're doing it alone, I mean, that weight is all on you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do it with other people, you spread it. It just spreads out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's no win in keeping it in a silo. Like you have to count on other people, because really you hold up the weight of whatever you're going through together.
It was one of the only times I ever saw my best friend cry. And it's just because he loves me.
Yeah.
It wasn't his kid. He just saw me hurting and wanted to intern with me.
Well, he was feeling empathy, and I think you felt that as encouragement.
So if we're going to give sort of like a guiding direction on the way out of this episode, how do we want to land the plane with people? Where do you hope that they hear this? And for one, those who are in it right now, but then also those who are preparing for someday going through this.
Yeah, I would say, one, your relationship with the Lord is so important. So if you're not going through grief, do the work now on connecting with God, because when grief hits, like Jordan said, like he could be your wheelchair or your crutch. Like he is strong enough to hold all the weight of the world and the grief of everyone on this planet. And so of course he can hold yours. But if you're not going through it, then build that foundation for when you do go through it. Mm-hmm. And if you are going through it, turn to God and turn to people. So, it's not, some people think like, oh, because God is God, he could have prevented this from happening. And that's true in one sense, but the brokenness of the world demands that sin and death happen. And we are a fallen world, Genesis 3, and it's going to happen. So don't blame God for what sin brought into the world. Instead, turn to him and watch him carry you. Watch him comfort you. Watch him use his word, his spirit, and his people, especially his people, I would say, in times of grief as they come alongside of you. And
don't do it alone.
Yeah, and be in community. Look, if you're not in community, then you are not prepared for when life happens. And so get into community, get to be known and know others, and be vulnerable with the things you're going through, because God uses those times and those people to carry you through the times of grief. And then maybe the last thing, and then maybe I'll ask you what you think is the takeaway. But just give yourself permission to grieve. Mm-hmm. Like, yes, you can cry. Whether you're a dude and you're listening to this, or you're a woman and you're listening to this, you can cry. And honestly, I probably would go as far to say you should, because that's part of the grieving process. But allow yourself to grieve in whatever way you grieve, but feel the weight of the pain. And that's the way we find closure when we move on.
Yeah. I mean, of course, yes. I think for me, one, it would be find yourself like the closest people and just consistently be honest with them in that community. I don't know that it's 100% healthy to blast all those things all over social media all the time.
Right.
It kind of feels like you may be getting it out there, but I don't know that it's coming back to you in the healthiest ways.
Yeah.
Allow those who know you the most know the most. And it's okay to let the world know something's going on and just pray for you, things like that, but do it in a meaningful way. Yeah. And then, I mean, I don't know that I would add much more into what you said. I think, as a guy who has a hard time connecting with his emotions, just be prepared that it may hit you at weird times. Yeah. I was telling you earlier at lunch about when I lost my grandma, my Mima was so meaningful to me. Yep. And it was like, I hadn't cried for a couple days. I don't know why. And I just so for something, like, it just saw her, like, her hands, And I thought about like how she used to like as a little kid just always hug and touch a lot and give you baths and wash your hair in the sink and stuff. And it just like I was at my birthday party and I walked outside and just cried in my front yard.
Yeah.
And my wife eventually found me, but
in a puddle of your tears.
Yeah, I was just like, I don't know. She's like, it's okay. Yeah. And I remember one of my friends came outside to ask a question. He was like,
turned around,
what's
walked
happening?
Away. Yeah,
he didn't know what was going on.
You
poor
made
guy.
him uncomfortable, but
yeah. So I think those are the only thing I would say is just whenever you need to process, do so.
Yeah,
and make space for that thing. I think it's awesome that you took like 5 hours and said, I don't know how Mike's gonna do this.
Yeah,
but I'm gonna do it. And know that that's a process, You don't just kind of do it and you're like, wow, I'm done grieving. Nice. I cried once. But just, have your process. So, I think this is obviously something that's really difficult. If you are walking with someone who is grieving, go ahead and I would say look back in the archives. We did a great episode with Shauna Wisely on what it's like to walk with people in those times. And so give that a listen. There's a lot of resources there. And if you're currently in the process of grieving or in some sort of pain and suffering, let me just tell you, we're with you. God is with you, and God's people want to be with you. Lean on Him in this time, and we love you. We care for you, even if we don't know who you are.
Yep. Amen. Well, that's good, Jordan. And, as we wrap up this episode, I do want to say, if you're enjoying the WellCast and this is something that is enriching your life, we would love it if you would follow and share. We want to be able to share the good news of what God's word says for us all with as many people as possible. So we would appreciate that.
Yeah.
And
we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the WellCast. As always, don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends about us. For more information about the Well Community Church, visit thewellcommunity.org.